call the meeting to order then, so if we'll stand for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, you want to have the roll call?
Jamie Girardi,
Here.
Michael Cox,
Here.
Peter Hansel, Roberta Size, Chris Williams,
I'm Richard Tonello.
He's Chris Williams today.
And you're not.
and then Chairman Charles Craig.
Here. All right, proof of publication.
The items were advertised in the Tampa Bay Times on September 27, 2019 and October 11, 2019, and by affidavit of certified mailings and site postings.
All right. And we have no minutes to approve. So I'd like to welcome everybody today. This is the Planning Commission. We meet twice monthly. We serve as a local planning agency, and we hold public hearings and transmit to the Board of County Commissioners recommendations on the comprehensive plan amendments, land development code amendments, rezonings, and conditional use requests. The Planning Commission is the final decision-making body for special exceptions, certain appeals, variance requests, and certain alternative standard requests. However, final decisions may be appealed to the Board of County Commissioners. If anyone is in opposition to any comprehensive plan amendment, land development code amendment, rezoning, conditional use, or any item where the Planning Commission transmits a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, it's important for you to attend the appropriate Board of County Commissioner meeting. For those of you who are not familiar with the format of our meetings, I'll go over them with you briefly. We have continuances in some cases where the staff or the applicant asks for a continuance for, it could be any number of reasons. It's been our tradition to grant those unless there's extenuating circumstances. We have a consent agenda, and that's the agenda wherein all the items that we'll go over are on consent. We haven't had any objection from anybody in the public or from the staff, and we'll go through those item by item. If there's something on the consent agenda that you'd like to have discussed today, as I read it off, raise your hand, and we'll pull it, and we'll hold it for discussion with the regular items, which are the items that are not on consent. So applicants will have 3 minutes to make a presentation. The questioners will have 3 minutes to ask their questions, and the applicant will have an opportunity to come back and respond to any questions. I don't think anybody has asked for additional time today, correct? So we won't go there. This is a good time to silence your phones if you have a phone in your pocket. Probably ought to do that myself. There we go. So before we start the regular meeting, we want to open the meeting for public comment on anything that is not appearing on today's agenda. Is there anybody here that wants to speak on something other than what's on the agenda? Okay. Cross that bridge. All right. I think we can begin. Yes, please. Yes. If you would, anyone who plans to give testimony today, if you could stand and be sworn, please.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, so help you God?
They seemed a little tentative on that one.
Good afternoon, Planning Commission members. Denise Hernandez, Planning and Development. Item PC1 is PDD 200037. It's a large-scale comprehensive plan amendment, CPAL 1915, 54 crossings. It's a large-scale comprehensive plan amendments of future land use maps 2-15 and sheet 20 for a change in the comp plan from Res 3, residential 3 dwelling units per gross acre, to office on approximately 12.81 acres. And this comes to you with a recommendation that you today recommend approval to the Board of County Commissioners, and you find the comp plan amendment consistent with the Pasco County Comprehensive Plan. On this item, you are sitting as a local planning agency.
All right, is the applicant present? Is there anyone here to object? I don't see any objections.
Item PC2, you're back at the Planning Commission, PDD 20-2077. In the name, this is a variance in the name of James and Anne Marie Alling. It's for a reduction in the required minimum rear setback from 5 feet to 3.3 feet from the rear property line, and a reduction in the required minimum setback from 15 feet to 5.5 feet from the main high water line for screen pool enclosure on waterfront property in an R4 high-density residential district. This comes to you with a recommendation of approval with conditions.
Is the applicant present? Anyone here to object? Don't see any problem.
Item PC3 is PDD 20-2078. This is a variance request as well in the name of West Pasco Habitat for Humanity, Inc. It's for a reduction in the required minimum south front setback from 5 feet to 6 inches for a driveway, and a reduction in the required minimum south front setback from 15 feet to 12.5 feet for a single-family dwelling on each lot being small lots of record in an RMH mobile home district. This is for lots 28 and 69. This comes to you with a recommendation of approval with conditions.
All right, and the applicant's present? Anyone here to object?
Mr. Chairman, I have one question
Yes,
on
go
that
ahead.
one. So my question is, has the city of Newport Richey been notified?
Yes, the City of Newport Richey, and it's in your agenda packet. The City of Newport Richey was notified through our interlocal agreement. We did not receive any comments from the City of Newport Richey.
Thank you. Leave it on consent.
All right, great. Okay.
Move for approval of the consent agenda.
You have a motion to approve consent?
I'll second.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Those who are on consent are free to take off and have a nice day.
Good afternoon, Alexandra Laporte, Planning and Development. This is PDD 20-005, Self-Storage Facilities Design Standards. You'll be acting as an LPA for this item. It was, we took public comments October 10th, and we're here for a vote today. I will read the ordinance. An ordinance by the Pasco County Board of County Commissioners amending the Pasco County Land Development Code, creating Section 1105, Self-Storage Design Standards, and amending Section 525, C1 Neighborhood Commercial District, Section 905.2, Landscaping and Buffering, Section 907.1, On-Site Parking, Section 1302.2, Mobility Fees to increase the mobility fees for mini warehouse, Appendix A, Definitions, and other amendments as necessary to ensure internal consistency, providing for applicability, repealers, severability, inclusion in the Pasco County Land Development Code, and an effective date. Since we last met on October 10th, we did receive further input from stakeholders. We met with the horizontal roundtable as well as the ordinance development team, and looped back around with some of the stakeholders we had originally met back in August. And I have outlined here the following changes to the ordinance presented today for a roll call vote by you. So based on that additional input, the scenic corridor name was changed to North 41 East 52 in order to minimize confusion with other definitions of the term, specifically that of the term as used in the comprehensive plan. Subsequent, the purpose in that corridor was also slightly changed to read that it is to protect and preserve view sheds and retain existing natural landscape and topography for parcels that have frontage along the corridor. We also change the height from the two-story max to as permitted in the zoning district or within the urban service area where applicable, because the area in 52 crosses two intersections of the urban service area. So in those locations, the height, there is no restriction. So we made that clarification. And with that, I'd like to, staff would recommend to find the proposed ordinance consistent with the Pasco County Comprehensive Plan and to recommend approval of the ordinance to the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay, do we have any questions from up here? Mike?
The North 41, 52, East 52 redevelopment transit corridor map. So it's, one of the things I brought up in the last meeting was that I felt like 41 in particular should be consistent from county line to county line. And north of 52, you have it with different standards.
Yes, we still kept that, those standards in that area as we had identified previously. I don't have that map, but right now, how the slice of parcels happen, it's a lot of the wetlands, and there are very few C1, C2 parcels. So we just kept it as the now North 41, East 52 corridor.
Right. But that corridor requires further setbacks, correct?
Correct.
So I just think it's inconsistent with the way 41 is to just stop at 52 and apply a different set of standards to it. I don't know what the rest of the commission feels like, but I think that 41 should be consistent.
Okay.
You know, and maybe that same little area that's marked here that is west of 41 on 52.
Okay. And you're suggesting, Commissioner Cox, that those be of the redevelopment standard?
Yes, the
Okay.
redevelopment corridor, right.
See, I think that there's definitely different characteristics north of 50, or north of 52 on 41 than between 52 and 54. I personally have a problem with even north of 52 on 41 being the 75-foot setback. But that's a different issue than you. I mean, what you're saying, actually puts in a 250-foot setback there.
No, the redevelopment would be consistent with the zoning district, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So what
Yeah, so
would
that's
be,
what I'm saying. a little bit, you
what
know.
would be the setback that you're recommending then, Michael?
If it's consistent with the zoning standards, a C1 or C2, it would be 25 feet.
Right.
Then I do agree, I take that back.
I mean, I agree with you that right as it exists today, it is a bit of a different topography, not even topography, but it's not going to be,
Right.
you know, as it continues to develop north. So I would just like to see at least that corridor be consistent from
41.
county line to county line. Yeah.
Okay.
And also the little area on
And that little-
52,
mhm.
yeah. So,
And on east of 52 as well? Is that what you're saying?
the west area of 52. I understand the east, you know, and I know the whole concept of trying to, what the staff and the Board of County Commissioners is trying to do with this. But that's just one area that I just think that should be consistent.
So everything on 52 west of 41
Should be in the redevelopment corridor.
should be the redevelopment.
Right.
And
all of 41.
And all of 41.
Yeah.
And east of, and east 52, it would have a larger setback.
Right.
Okay. Are we,
Yeah, see, personally, I'm not a fan of the 75-foot setback, but I just think that that's overboard as far as those corridors go. I mean, in certain uses that, I don't know why we're enacting or why are we implementing a 75-foot setback there? I just still don't understand that, but that's just my position.
Okay. Are
So-
there
so-
Can I ask,
so-
well, I have a different question, but I'll wait till you guys are done
are
with
there
it.
any other concerns other than what David has to ask?
So,
I have a series of questions.
well,
I got several.
let me get my, you want to just ask mine first?
Yeah.
Okay, so, Alexander, we talked at ODT about I-75 and the Suncoast,
Yeah.
and as we discussed at ODT, I'm concerned, I'm not sure I care so much about what the required setback is, but I have concerns about treating it, if the purpose of the setback on 54, 56 is preservation of employment, which that appears to be the purpose of it,
Mm-hmm.
I'm concerned about not having the same standard on I-75 and the Suncoast because those are key employment corridors for us. And again, I don't know what the right standard is, whether it's 250, 75, 5 feet, 7 feet, I don't care what the standard is.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that we should be treating I-75 and the Suncoast materially different than 54, 56 because I see the employment deals we do, and many of them are on the Suncoast and I-75. So
And we had,
if the board's intent is to preserve corridors for employment, I don't think that I-75 and the Suncoast should have lesser standing in terms of preservation for employment.
no, and we looked at your suggestions, David, and we were trying to figure out how to address it from the point of view of what happens with this use when it's pushed back from those corridors and actually up against in the street. So then you'll have this use that's not very active. Sometimes most of the MPDs are along those corridors, so sometimes in the middle of a neighborhood, but it's been pushed back from the corridor. So we didn't know how to kind of resolve that with the standards that we have right now, but we had looked at your suggestions. The 250 feet would certainly work from the corridor right-of-way. It's just a matter then the impact of that building and use essentially being pushed up to on the front of a neighborhood street. So once you get off the highway and you're in that MPUD neighborhood, that self-storage now has a frontage that may or not be compatible with residential right up against it. So we didn't,
Well, but you could have the same problem on 54, 56. I don't know how that's materially different. I mean, I just don't understand the difference.
because the corridor is actually more, instead of a frontage, I understand your definition of the frontage, but when you're on the street as a pedestrian, that is more of the back of the parcel. The back of the parcel that fronts the corridor, essentially. So that's the difference between the 54, 56 and,
I mean, I just try to think what was the board's intent when they did this ordinance and, or asked for this ordinance. I thought their primary goal was to preserve employment on the 54, 56 corridor.
correct.
Okay, that they didn't want the frontage taken up with uses that don't generate employment. That was my understanding of their overarching goal.
Correct.
So this somewhat dovetails to Mr. Girardi's comment. I'm not sure they had any specific direction about other areas. Okay, but putting that aside, I don't know how you can, I don't think if I asked the Board of County Commissioners whether they wanted to see a self-storage facility fronting I-75 or the Suncoast, I think they'd probably say no.
Okay.
And
And we can have that as an option, certainly for November 5th. We can have that change.
I mean, and you see that. I mean, I drive in Tampa down I-75. I see some self-storage facilities that are right next to the
Absolutely.
interstate.
Right.
So, I mean, it's not like this
And
is
then
some
you'll see what,
theoretical problem.
no, it's not. You're right. It's just a matter of, it's the vehicle point of view or the pedestrian. So then you've pushed this use to be on a frontage where a pedestrian interacts with it versus the highway frontage. That's where we were,
But I'm not sure why the use has to go there at all. I mean, why, I mean, that's,
yeah, oh, sure.
So I think the observation can be accommodated, hearing the two perspectives here. Nectarios Pitos, Planning and Development. So David, just to be clear, you're saying that it would be consistent with the economic development thrust of this ordinance to add I-75 into that transit corridor and the Suncoast.
and the Suncoast. I mean, because I'm just telling you that, because I helped negotiate the Mettler-Toledo deal, okay, it's right on the Suncoast. The use everybody seemed to like, that it's there, big employer. It couldn't have located there if we had had a big mini storage there. I mean, it wanted to be right there on the Suncoast with ready access to the airport. I mean, that a lot of our employers are wanting to have that ready access to the airport from the Suncoast or ready access to I-75. And so there's no question that if you put a mini storage where Mettler-Toledo is now, it would have precluded that use.
Yes. Right.
And I thought that was the board's intent with this, was that they wanted to keep those key employment corridors available for employers. I thought that was the driving force behind this ordinance.
I understand. I think we can accommodate and add that. One thought that I'm having is that using similar language to the corridor setback, where it talks about, let's see, where is it? That's actually in the general design standards. When you're proposing a multi-use in the transit corridor, you can bring that facility forward into the setback area. We could use similar language to say that when you're, let's say you're 250 feet setback from I-75 or the Suncoast, if you happen to front then a local road, just make sure that you're a multi-use first floor storage facility.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's using the same language, just if you're coming off and then you're on a frontage road to the local network, you just have to have a little bit of a mixed-use nature to yourself.
Okay, and again, I don't want to delve in too much into the design standards. That isn't my goal of my comment. It's
Yes.
simply that
No,
if the purpose of this ordinance is to protect 54, 56 for employment, I don't think that we should be saying that Suncoast and I-75 deserve lesser protection.
Okay, we can fix that.
Okay, do we want to come up with specific
Well,
language now, or are we gonna?
Well, I mean, you could make a motion to just include them as transit corridors with those two roads as transit corridors, and then have staff make the necessary modifications to make that work. I don't know that we're going to come up with the exact
Yeah,
language here.
okay. And what about the other ones that you talked about, Mike? And
Well, before we have a motion, I've got a couple series of questions here.
oh, fire away.
Sorry. As far as the effective date goes for the mobility fee,
We didn't discuss that at all, so I apologize. The mobility fees table, those numbers for the freestanding piece are still being calculated. So right now, they still remain the placeholder that you saw on October 10th. We're hoping that those numbers will be reviewed and calculated accordingly for the board. And if not, then, we would propose to recommend that we hold that freestanding component of the mobility fee until we are able to finish out those calculations. I'm sorry.
The only reason that makes me nervous on the mobility fee is we're placeholdering a high number. I mean, so there's no incentive. The incentive's not with the county, the incentive's with the private side to push you guys to adopt the correct fee. Because I think everybody here would agree that fee's probably too high. I mean, if you did the reverse and you adopted a 0, I promise you guys would get the right number in there pretty quick. That's my only point there.
So,
Yeah, not a bad point.
so, I mean, you could make a recommendation that the ordinance not be adopted until the correct fee is put in. I mean, it's within your,
Sure.
I mean, the difficulty that staff has, I'll
Yeah.
just tell you, is they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Is They were told by the board they got to get this done in 4 months.
Mhm.
Okay. I think staff would like to put in the correct fee, but I don't think the data is available yet.
Right.
And so, but if the planning commission were to recommend that this be continued notwithstanding the moratorium,
Right.
so that that could be added, I don't think staff cares. I mean, I think staff's probably okay with it. Just they're up against this deadline that they're stuck with is the problem.
Okay, just a point of clarification, could there be 2 different ordinances? One that carried the mobility
Well, I
fee
think what
separate?
Mr. Girardi is suggesting is that he wants it done with this one. I think that's what
I
he's-
think that makes most sense. Then you don't have to come back. I think everybody would like to do it all at one time. My only point is, I think it will definitely be all at one time if that number is a 0 for freestanding boat and RV storage. To whereas the way it is now, with the higher numbers, the inflated numbers in there, I mean, I've been dealing personally, and just for disclosure, I've been dealing personally with the consultant that's doing the traffic counts, okay? And I've been hearing for 3 weeks that the traffic counts will be done. Well, the traffic counts are done, so now we've got a trip rate, but how do you take the trip rate and calculate that and formulate that into what the fee is? I mean, people need to be, county needs to be involved in getting that number in my opinion, and getting that turned into a mobility fee for inclusion with this ordinance.
Yeah, to bring the rest of the planning commission up to speed, the reason we have an issue is because, I don't know why it happened, but freestanding RV and boat storage got lumped in with mini storage. And there are some times when they're on the same site, that does happen. But we didn't have a separate fee for a freestanding R&V boat storage, so, and then we had the board directive to increase the fees on mini storage. So staff was trying to increase the fees on mini storage, but not increase them on the freestanding stuff. But, and may in fact like to lower them, they just don't have the data to do it. So that's why they're stuck. But I think, in their defense, they at least didn't increase them. At least they didn't throw them in the increase pile with the mini storage. But I don't think there's anything wrong with it if it's part of planning commission recommendation that the ordinance include that reduction, then staff will just, and then the board in theory would have to wait to adopt this until that occurs. It's really up to the board. The other dilemma that we have is that part of the reason I think some board members wanted this done quickly is because there's a lot of pressure for these mini storage facilities coming in, and so they're trying to do something to regulate them without dragging this out too far.
What are the questions you have?
On the actual effective date, though, and I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure. Now, mobility fees are due at building permit issuance, correct? Not at CO?
They're due at CO, they're calculated at building permit. In other words, they tell you how much you owe at building permit, and then you pay them at CO.
Okay, so if somebody has a building permit, is currently under construction, they're going to get their CO after the first of the year, are they subject to the old fee or the new fee?
The way it works is it depends on when, and they may need to massage that language, but it's tied to the building permit issuance. That's when you determine your fee. So if you get your building permit before that date, you're still under the old fees.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, yeah.
Even if you get
there's
your CO after. So all of our fee increases are tied to the issuance of the building permit.
So do we need to add something in there that indicates that, or is that?
Probably, I would agree that it needs to be clarified. Because how does it read now?
Mobility fees increase as amended shall be effective on December 27, 2019.
So I think what it should say is shall be effective as to building permits issued after that date.
Issued after.
Instead of shall be effective, shall apply to building permits issued after December 27, 2019.
Okay.
Now I'm going to switch over to the ordinance itself. I mean, the standard itself, I'm sorry.
Yep.
The North 41, East 52 corridor, is there a reason why we're limiting the 3-acre minimum size for those projects? I mean, if somebody has a 1 or 2 acre parcel, they can't do boat storage?
If you're
Example?
right on the corridor. If your parcel is on the corridor. If you're outside of that, then there is no restriction. So it's just those parcels that touch the corridor right of way.
And I don't know how many parcels are there smaller than that, so I just think that that's,
And there's not currently a lot except for at the intersections of the Intercoast and 75, where it's the urban service area. You have the most C2 parcels currently. So
I would imagine most parcels off of the main corridor won't be zoned properly anyway.
right.
That's true.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's only on the corridor directly, the way I understand it, right?
Yes.
these standards, yeah, your parcel is on the corridor right of way.
We go to 1105.5. Now, this is for all self-storage facilities, not just those along the corridor?
Correct. They're just the general ones, yeah. So they won't follow any of the additional corridor setbacks that we've established. They'll have just the regular performance standards and general building design standards that 1102 provides for buildings that are larger than 25,000 square feet.
Okay,
We have
so
that currently in the LDC.
now, that's just self-storage, that's not freestanding boat storage.
Correct.
And so if I understand correctly, all self-storage projects follow big box standards from 1102.
25,000 square feet or greater, yes.
If they're 25,000 square feet or greater, or no matter what?
Usually there'll be 25,000 square feet.
I understand, I'm just
But-
trying to clarify,
Yes.
because I,
That's what 1102 said.
Yeah, that's what
Say that in there.
1102 says.
well,
So we're
1102
just-
does indirectly. Yeah, I mean, I just, there's standards of the big box ordinance that are intended for retail, and that's why they're there, and they're getting lumped into self-storage, and 10-foot buffers around the facades of buildings on self-storage, I mean, that seems a bit excessive.
The specific.
Just as an example.
Sure. And per the mobility fee, self-storage is a commercial retail use. And then the size of the building alone would trigger additional care in designing that building because they are so massive. So
Anything
don't
over
typically
25,000.
think
Well,
of it
no,
as a
I mean,
retail use because you're not going in
The
and out.
county's never enforced it that way, that's the only reason now it's an issue for me. I mean, I think it's, okay, I've made my point. When you get down to 11055B, under the buildings, basically you've got 1102 and you've got all the subsections under section 4. Facades is a duplication of A, except it's more stringent. Same thing with B. I guess there's nothing wrong with that, I just,
Which section are you referring to?
11055B3. There's
Okay.
already a facade section in 11024A.
These are a lot of times a summary of what the more detail is described in the 1102 section. So it shouldn't be more stringent.
Why
The
are we
glazing
restating it then?
component is recommended in order to, especially if you're up against a corridor, if you're doing active use, that's something that you want. You don't want blank walls along those stretches of street.
And I think the key terminology there is glazing doesn't necessarily mean transparency.
glazings are windows, right?
Yeah, but you can also have spandrel glass, for example,
Oh, okay.
as an example.
What, so when staff at the end of the day is reviewing a plan, and they go and they see a requirement in 11024A and 11055B3, I mean, I haven't compared them, but one, if you're summarizing, why do you have to summarize what it already says? It's already referred to. But if it's, I mean, are you sure there's no conflicts in there? You refer to a facade section that's in one section of the code, then you restate a whole other section of the code. It's duplication, and I don't understand why.
You think it should be taken out?
Well,
I think it should be taken out somewhere.
Does it say the same
they
thing?
could provide some guidance in terms of what the intent of this particular section is and how 1102 is applied. So it's not necessarily adding regulation on top of 1102, it's simply clarifying an intent or how to treat a self-storage facility.
And then you go to 1102 for the detail of that. It's not saying anything in addition to 1102. So facades are to provide visual interest, and you do that specifically and in detail in looking at 1102 section, where it tells you the amount of feet you have to change your wall plane and the amount of length of your building before you need to trigger that wall plane change. So we didn't want to add all of that again and be redundant in this section, but reference it, but give you a quick summary. So someone who's doing self-storage, they get a full picture right away from the standard. And then some of those minute details like the setbacks per zoning districts, you'll then refer to that specific section for that.
In my opinion, if you don't have a savvy person looking at your code, it's misleading. Because
Okay.
if I'm reading this and I read through and I say, okay, well, here, oh, I have a section that talks about my facades, here's my detail. I don't go to 11024A and look at all the different requirements.
Would introducing a reference to 1102 in that paragraph?
So each
that-
paragraph, really,
Why-
because
why do you need those
all of
paragraphs?
those items are pulled from 1102 as summary. So massing is discussed in 1102, facade, materials, and so we could list 1102 in each of those.
Yeah, one of the problems that I have is that, and I've seen this happen too many times, when public comes to seeing somebody in a specific department and says, what can I do with my property, A, B, C, D? And the person giving them the answer gives them the wrong answer because they don't really understand all the intricacies and how, like he's saying, one code affects another code, and one paragraph affects another. They don't have the knowledge that you have. And so it ends up being a problem. Then they come to me and ask me about it, and then I come out here and I ask somebody about it. I mean, it's just, we just need to keep it as simple as possible.
And I understand that concern, and that's why current planning, we did have those design development reviewers go over this and provide feedback as well to make sure that it's clear for them, you know, what to instruct applicants during the pre-application meetings.
Okay.
What do you recommend?
If we take these references.
Go with your gut, whatever you recommend.
That's not, yeah.
I mean, if you want to be specific about facades and materials, I think you put that in here and you get rid of the reference up above in item B1. But I don't think that's not what I hear you saying. I hear you saying it's B1 plus
No, it's
this.
not plus, it's a summary of what your.
Materials is plus.
Huh?
The materials is plus, because the materials in 1102-4B only talks about the materials. It doesn't get into paint color and all that other stuff that you're trying to lump in here.
Okay.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that the intent of the BCC was to regulate where these facilities are going to be at and also what they look like. Because, I mean, it seems pretty clear that they don't like the way they look, which I agree with. So, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't it make sense for if the ordinance and the design standards that deal with storage are a little bit more stringent than what the general code says, doesn't that make sense? I mean, it does to me, but of course I don't apply these things.
Well, I mean, I agree, but I don't agree 100%. I mean, you've got projects out there that the stakeholders and the people they've circulated this to, 70 to 80% of the people like certain projects that they see. So a general statement of people don't like what's being built is, I don't think that's true. There's some really good projects being built. Now, how do you differentiate that and how do you?
They did not like the visual from the corridors, or, you know, how a lot of them were not, you know, as addressed as they could be. There are examples that are good, and we certainly looked at those that Commissioner Moore specifically had outlined and built that into the standards, and they've done a really good job on their own. So we'd like to see that replicated more often than just the 1 or 2 times that it occurs.
No, and again, I think that section needs to be cleaned up. Bottom line, I think there's a whole lot here that people don't realize is here. And I see this leading down a path of, this is the start. Next thing we're gonna get apartments. Next thing we're gonna get another thing. And we're painting everybody into such a box. They gotta come to Alexander or somebody in Terry's office and get them to approve the color of their paint on their building. I mean, it takes long enough to get things through Pasco County as it is. Do we want to start adding that stuff too? I mean, I just, a lot of this stuff I just got heartache about just because of the path that I see it going down, that's all.
So, since I was at the board meeting where this was discussed, I think there was 2 focuses. You're correct, that the big focus was, we don't want to see these areas on our key employment corridors because they're taking up space that employers they're empty space that employers could occupy.
Yep.
And if I had to predict, I would say that was 70% of what the board was after, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But they did say, in the same breath, and we want to see design standards.
Mm-hmm.
But in staff's defense, they weren't clear about what these design standards should be. They just said, go forth and create design standards without, you know, any real clear guidance. And so, this is not something where I could tell you exactly, you know, which ones the board thought were ugly and which, I mean, maybe you've had discussions with the board members about which ones they thought were ugly and which ones they liked, but, you know, that's kind of where we are. I mean, I don't know for sure if it's going to, you know, lead to other forms of development. That
That's speculation.
I will say that, in my opinion, the board desire to do something about multifamily isn't as strong as it is for mini storage. I think it's really one commissioner that wants to do something about multifamily. It's I'm not sure it's all of them, but there appears to be general board consensus on mini storage that A, they're in the wrong place, and B, they need to look a little better. But you know, it's hard to figure out what that should be.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with that and I understand that. I just think, I mean, we took step 1 was the first 2 pages of this land development code, that section that is what I heard predominantly the commissioner say, and then we took and we applied it to every single self-storage unit in the county, whether it's on the corridor, any corridor or not, in the new standards. And that's just my only point. I think that these 2 pages are very limiting. They're very restrictive. They place a whole lot of additional development costs on people coming in. And frankly, there are these projects that we need. We're approving apartment complexes where we need storage, whether anybody likes it or not. Okay, I don't think they need to be on 54, 56, but we do need them, and there's good projects being built off of the main corridors.
And we don't disagree, and that's why we feel that these standards, looking at best practices and looking at other jurisdictions and what they've done, as well as what's been developed in Pasco County, we took all of that into consideration and made sure that we're not placing an undue burden. You know, Dade City in their ordinance, you cannot be a self-storage use without being a multi-use development. They will not allow it anymore unless you're an adaptive reuse. Is the only time you can come in as a single use. They have also limited the lot size to 5 acres as a minimum acres. So there's a lot of other jurisdictions that have been much more restrictive. And when we looked at the pattern of development in Pasco, we said, okay, well, where's the balance? And we feel that the standards that we're presenting shows that balance.
So one of the things that I will comment on is that the county has really done an about face on making it easier to do business in the county, providing that you are bringing in the type of project that is going to benefit the county. So an employment generating use is going to get the red carpet rolled out as it should. These ancillary things that come to being because of what you want, I think we should get those right. And, okay, maybe that requires approval of a color palette, but I don't see that's, if you're in that business, I'm sure you don't like it. But overall, it makes the county look better and I think function better so that we can continue to get more of the employment generating projects that we want. So, I mean, having some tighter restrictions on this stuff, I personally think is not a bad thing. Because when they do come in, you know, they'll get it right.
A lot of these standards, the way they're written, are very loose, very ambiguous, and frankly, in several cases how do you put landscaping around the perimeter, the entire perimeter of a self-storage building? If any of you guys ever use self-storage, they all have doors all the way around 3 sides. How do you landscape around the perimeter of a self-storage building? So that's just my only point. I don't think this gets it right.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you.
Well, I think the time constraint is the thing that's kind of messed things up, because they have to have it done by a time certain, so we can't, something we can continue.
Yep.
We can't, and it's,
To address that, Commissioner, those doors that you talk about for self-storage along the corridors would not be allowed to be facing that frontage. They have to be perpendicular to the frontage. So they're, or completely enclosed in the climate controlled. So you do have the opportunity for the landscape to happen, because what prohibits the landscape is being addressed.
I thought we were talking about more than just on the corridors, though.
I'm sorry?
I thought we were talking about more than just on the corridors, though. This is all.
Yes, but that is, I'm saying specifically on the corridors, but in general, that perpendicular standard applies. So you're not seeing these garage doors everywhere. They're turned perpendiculars.
Well, how did
So
we
the
go?
side
how-
of the building.
How did we go from the major corridors to all roads? How'd that happen? Because I know that in my conversations with some of the commissioners, they were talking about limiting the corridors, the major corridors, not,
And we're not putting
Other
those,
roads.
I mean, yes. Some of these things needed to be refined and clarified. We had very few standards for mini warehousing as a whole in this special exception use. So we've pulled that out and made sure that accessory uses were clearly identified, where they're located were clearly identified. So even though the setbacks of the corridor standards wouldn't apply, you're still not seeing all of this stuff just happening along all the frontage, that there's some uniformity to that development.
Well, if some of the standards you feel are extremely ambiguous, why can't we, leave those out temporarily and come back when we have more specifics, like we're doing with some other things? And just approve it on the basis of the original standards.
We, and
first
David, you
section.
can help me, we would not, right now, as it stands, we would not be able to come back to you. The board has approved the moratorium 120-day to be extended to allow for the adoption hearing to happen on November 19th. So we are
I think what
on
he's
course.
suggesting is, and tell me if I say this wrong, I think he's suggesting that you only move forward with the restrictions on the designated corridors, and not include the standards that apply to all self-storage facilities. And he's suggesting that be a different ordinance at a later date. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I do know that
Bill on
Commissioner,
arrival.
during the board hearing back in September, November, that was something the Board of County Commissioners did not want us to do, is to come back and piecemeal standards for this use time and time again. So we're doing a comprehensive package at this time, and that was clearly noted at that point, that they didn't want one quarter to come and then another piece of it and then other standards to come and trickle along.
So let me ask you, are there provisions to deviate from this?
So our code as a whole allows for that to happen through alternative standards. So to answer your question in a short way, yes, there's always a provision to assist in that if there's extraneous.
And are those administratively approved?
They would be.
Administratively approved?
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's a solution there if it's an issue that doesn't work with a particular piece of property or something of that nature.
Yes.
Right.
If I understand the dialogue, I was on a sidebar conversation, but our code does have capability to deal with certain circumstances. If the code isn't working right for a development, we can issue an alternative standard, and if there's a pattern of issues that arise out of that, then you could come back with a code amendment to address all the various alternative standards that we're issuing. But to provide some clarification with regard to letter D, buffer, as I understand the 1102 requirements, there's only a 50% requirement along the front facade, so the customer-facing facade. And so with 50% landscaping, there's ample opportunity there to organize it in such a way that it should be able to work for the use. And of course, if there's one instance in which it's not working as well as it should, you do have the alternative standard option to facilitate that forward. Also, with regard to the other facades, 1102 does not have a prescriptive percentage requirement for the landscaping along those facades. So there too, you can provide some ability to be flexible with the landscaping.
I might be misreading 1102 H1B, but all other facades seems pretty clear to me.
That they should have landscaping.
That's the way I interpret it, but I don't, I read 1102H to mean that you gotta have landscaping around every facade around in your property on your building.
So,
Maybe I'm wrong, David, I don't know.
I don't even have that section in
so
front of me.
so say that, if you could repeat that, please.
1102H1,
No, you read that and to
B
read that
says all
facades?
other facades, except the facade incorporating the service area, shall be screened from public view with no less than a 10-foot wide buffer with foundation landscaping.
Right, but there's no prescriptive percentage. So in this
You're
case, if
correct,
there-
it
if
doesn't.
there's-
But if I
if
tell you I've
there's-
got all of your money, that means I got 100%.
Okay, so the reason I'm confused
Uh-huh.
is because I'm reading B1 of this ordinance,
Right.
and it says 1102.4 A through E and I through K shall apply, so it doesn't list H.
On D,
Letter D.
letter D.
Oh,
of the-
D?
Yes.
Oh, that one, okay.
I mean,
Referring to the
if,
building or the
in my
actual project
opinion,
permit?
if you wanted to take this ordinance and make 11055 applicable at this time to projects on the corridor, I could live with it on a corridor. But a county-wide, I have heartburn about doing something to a project on some off-beaten road that's all of a sudden got to come in and they've got to meet your architectural requirements for all the facades, all the materials, all the landscaping. I mean, there's a lot of these projects that are being built off of the beaten path. I mean, yeah, architecturally, we don't want them to build something ugly, but they don't want to build something ugly.
Some of them do.
And currently, I guess luckily, I don't know, C2s really only happen on the corridors. There's instances, but it's not the majority.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of C2s on roads like Rowan Road, and and Decubulus Road, there's some C2 there. There's C2 on Moon Lake Road, there's C2,
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
there's C2 everywhere. And it's not just on the major corridors, so, and that's basically what I'm agreeing with Jamie about, is that, I think the thrust of it was to control the eye candy, basically, the roads that are most heavily traveled. The people come through our county, that's what they see when they come through, and we don't want them to see a big blank building sitting there with no windows and painted purple. I understand that. But that shouldn't apply to some road that's, on Decubulus Road or on Massachusetts Avenue or.
Well, imagine if the one that's on Starkey Boulevard and the Cupulus, if that developer hadn't taken care and making that building what it is, which that is an entrance, it's off the corridor certainly, but it is an entrance to a significant community in Pasco. So I'm
Well,
grateful that he did take the time to make
Yeah, I
those
mean,
designs.
from a practical point of view, you're not going to build a $7 million project and have it look stupid. It just doesn't work. And that's where Jamie's talking about, if you're talking about a mom and pop operation that, where they're going to build a row of little storage units, that's one thing. I
Like
mean,
the ones on Rowan Road there.
when there are some like that. But the county commissioners, my understanding was, they wanted to control the major corridors. Yeah, am I right, David?
As I said, I think that was 70 to 75% of their goal. The difficulty was that there were commissioners that did say at the same meeting, they wanted to see countywide design standards. The problem was they weren't very specific about what that meant. I mean, we had much more specificity about this, the setback off the major corridors. I mean, they gave us examples of ones they liked and didn't like when it came to that. So, but I can't tell you that the board didn't want design standards, countywide design standards, because they clearly said that they did. Now, I don't know if they knew that, I can't promise you this is what they meant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe staff has had more conversations with them, so maybe is this what they meant?
Well, go ahead.
Well, I
In
mean,
our meetings, it's been.
We've talked to the commissioners and shown them the drafts here, and we've gotten their feedback and incorporated it into it. I could say that, I don't want to say how many, I suppose, but a number have been agreeable to what we've presented to them. But I don't want to put words in their mouth either. But we have shown them the draft. They have been able to see it and comment to us. And we've received generally good feedback to incorporate into what you see here today.
What was the thought of, and I'm revisiting in my mind the comments that David made regarding the 52 corridor. So why not try to protect it like you did 54 and 56? I mean, granted, today it doesn't look the same, but it will at some point, you know? So, especially around, you know, the big, like I-75, the Suncoast, and maybe some of these other big intersections where there are really targeted employment
If they
areas.
include I-75 and the Suncoast, which that is my recommendation, they'll catch those.
Right, right.
But you're talking about the part of 52 between I-75 and that part?
Well, you know, like, I'll give you an
Once
example.
they four-lane it, it's going to be a different character.
Yeah, and, you know, we talked about an employment center there at, Bellamy Brothers Road and 52.
There is there's a Central Pasco Employment Building.
Right, so, you know, there's that, and so why not just,
Well,
why not include that as a transit corridor?
Well, I think what they'd probably have to do, though, is they'd have to change that to transit/employment corridor, because the difference between 52 and the other roads we talked about is in a 54, 56, I-75, and the Suncoast, there are plans for regional transit serving those areas. I
So
don't know-
that's quote-unquote the name, why the name came
Yeah,
out like that, okay.
but I don't know that that's really true for all of State Road 52.
Oh,
There may be
okay.
some local
correct.
bus, but it's not part of it's not even part of the urban service area. Like the part of the Suncoast you're thinking now, the Suncoast urban service area goes all the way up to 52,
Yeah,
and the I-75 urban service area goes all the way up to 52 as well. So we call those the fingers. Like so those corridors are included in the urban service area. And that was the reason why I made the comment, well, I-75 and the Suncoast should be included because
right.
they're all part of the same urban service area and same transit emphasis. 52 doesn't have that same transit emphasis. So
Today it doesn't, but it will,
I'm just saying in the
And
comp plan, it's
54
not
didn't.
showing that. But
15 years ago, right?
but I mean, there's a way to accomplish what you're talking about. You would just have to change the name to transit/employment. And there are some designated employment areas on 52. So they could do what you're saying. I'm just saying they'd have to change the name. It's not really a designated transit corridor today.
So if they change the name to Transit Employment Center, would that automatically pull in those
They
areas?
could
that
apply
have
the
been
same standards.
Okay.
They have here for the transit corridor one. I'm just pointing out that they'd have to change the name to
Yeah, yeah.
transit/employment because 52 is not a designated transit corridor.
So let me ask the staff a question then. If that is the intent of the BCC, wouldn't it make sense to alter that transit corridor to be more transit/employment?
Well, one of the things so we looked at the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan was guiding us in how we were going to organize this ordinance. One of the things that is a significant feature along State Road 52 is how topographically natural it is in terms of some of the wetlands that exist along the 52 corridor. And quite a bit of that corridor is wetland, some of which can't be changed. Some things that can be changed, sure. The current North 41 East 52 corridor settings, if you will, are suggesting that this particular use be pushed back off the corridor in order to preserve some of those natural topographical features. At the same time, it's also saying that because, that's not saying explicitly, but if you really think about mini storage, it's a dormant type of use. And so when you have a limited quantity of C2 available to you along a corridor, you don't want that limited quantity to be dominated by a dormant use. You want to be able to activate that with the necessary retail or other economic functions for the local community. And so if you're going to have that dormant use, you're going to want to set that back. In setting that back, you're able to preserve then some of those natural features that are there. Now, it's only for one use. It's not for all C2 uses. But at least you're capturing, at this point, some of the natural topography and what features are out there along the 52 corridor. On top of that, I'd say too that, those areas that are most developable for 52, like in the central Pasco Employment Village, those are planned and ready to go. I think we recently passed the first MPUD on that. I think that would be my suggestion for 52 is to keep it the way it is for now.
So, yeah, the difficulty with 52 is in terms of transit. I can't speak for employment. The Central Pasco Employment Village was kind of visioned as sort of a suburban employment village, not necessarily urban. And I'm not sure we have the level of densities approved today on 52 that we need to support transit. I mean, he's right. If you drive on it, it's pretty vacant. I mean, there's.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So, now, along the I-75 and the Suncoast, it's a different story because we are planning some pretty significant, we just approved Project Arthur, which
Yep.
and connected cities off of the interstate. So on those corridors, yes, there's some fairly intense development plan where we likely could see some transit occur. But the segment of 52, I think you're talking about is, whether we like it or not, it is more of a rural nature today.
Well, the thrust of my comment is it's those areas that we're trying to protect on 54, we also ought to take that same attitude to try to protect the other areas that are not critical at this point, but that are designated for employment. So whether you do that by changing the titling of these standards or the map or whatever the case may be, but I'm 90% sure the intent of the county commission is to protect those employment areas to make sure that employment generating uses go in them.
So let me make a recommendation to you. Because I think what we're really talking about is Central Pasco Employment Village. I don't know of any other thing off of 52 that jumps off, that I remembered that is a plan there for employment.
But,
So-
I mean, if I look at this map, I-75 is considered what used to be called the scenic corridor.
Right, but I'm
But
suggesting.
that intersection is not there. This
But I'm
intersection's
suggesting,
not
but I'm
there.
suggesting that that's why I started this conversation.
Right.
Was suggesting that we add Suncoast and I-75.
Yeah.
Which will cover those two intersections.
Okay.
The urban service area has little bulb outs at those intersections. I don't have the
Yes,
map, but
yes.
it's got like little, it's more than just the actual intersection. It goes, there's a significant amount of land around
Yeah.
those interchanges that's part of the urban service area.
Right.
So, in my opinion, if you add Suncoast and I-75 to these protections, you'll cover most of what you're talking about. What you won't cover is Central Pasco Employment Village, but as the MPDs come in for Central Pasco Employment Village, we can just require they not have mini storage within 300 feet of their frontage. I mean,
Right.
staff could just make sure that happens when those MPDs come in. Most of them have not come in yet. We had one.
We had one.
And it was for an light industrial use, so I don't think the mini storage would even go there.
So how do we amend this to include, these intersections and also the change that I would prefer up on 54 or 41?
So we need to make a motion, well, we probably need to do these motions one at a time because
Yeah.
there's probably some things you all agree on and some things you don't. I think you first should address whether you're gonna add Suncoast and I-75, at least the portions that are in the urban service area, to the transit corridors.
Okay, so a motion to amend this?
Yes,
Would
to
be in
add,
order?
yeah,
Okay.
to add the Suncoast and I-75, or the portions of I-75 and the Suncoast that are in the urban service area to the transit corridors.
Okay,
Just for-
I'll move that effect.
For clarification, is that just at the interchanges, or is that everything along 75 and Suncoast?
It actually includes, the urban service area it's the whole stretch.
Whole corridor.
But I don't want you to think that, like, even the Suncoast, we're
Should be
getting,
up for you there.
yeah, the Suncoast has got, we've approved Project Arthur on the east side of the Suncoast. It's gonna have significant development, and if we get the new interchange at Ridge Road, which I'm hoping will happen soon, there could be some pretty significant development occurring on the Suncoast. You don't see it today,
Oh, yeah.
but what's planned could be very intense. And then I-75 is already approved for fairly intense development along it as
Yeah, I
well.
mean,
So-
the only reason I asked that question is, and I don't know some of these areas well enough, but there's some, what I would classify rural sections, and I'm gonna throw one out, and maybe it's not even, there's no C2, so it doesn't matter. But Shady Hills Road, where it backs up to the Suncoast, I mean, pretty far north in the county, all of a sudden, they have a 250-foot setback is what what's the setback?
75.
75-foot setback? Or maybe it's not that big.
Well, to be clear,
Okay. I thought we were
I
lumping that
was talking
into
about
the
Suncoast
250
and
foot.
75 themselves, not other roads off of them.
Right.
I'm not
What becomes
suggesting they include this whole blue area. Okay, what I'm suggesting is that
There it is.
those roads,
Right
the
there.
Suncoast and I-75, have the same setbacks as 54, 56.
Which is 250, isn't it?
Right.
So that becomes your rear setback on lots on Shady Hills Road, for example, that back up to 70, to Suncoast. That's why I
possible.
asked the question about interchange only.
You could stop it at 52.
For residences, you mean? We're talking
We're
about.
talking about for storage.
Stop it at 52.
We could stop it at 52 if that's the concern. I don't have, I mean, that was my,
So just for argument's sake, if we did the urban service area and somebody wanted to do it on Shady Hills Road, and I agree with Jamie, that's probably not appropriate, but administratively, can the staff allow it?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Cox, could you say that again?
Okay, so.
do an alternative standard, if that's your.
Yeah, could you do an alternative standard for that project without a lot of undue
It's a-
pain on the developer?
It's a variance, so a reduction in a setback is a variance.
Setback, okay.
So it would have to go through the process to this board? Okay.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
it's the facade design standards that are alternative standards. The setback is a little different, so.
Except as we've written that setback on the transit corridors, the 250, if you have an active ground floor use, 50% or greater of your ground floor use, you can reduce that setback.
Okay.
Yeah, you can be infinite.
Now, let me ask, so
that's written.
if we included the urban service area in the transit corridor, David, would that in any way negatively affect Project Arthur?
No. I don't even know that Project Arthur is, I don't think it's, Brad, you need to help me out. I don't even think they have many storages or permitted use.
I don't know that we excluded it specifically, but I don't know that any is intended.
Well, I mean, but that whole project,
Well,
I mean, it
I can
goes
tell
way.
you that, I can tell you that Project Excalibur, which is the primary driver of Arthur, likely has no intention of ever doing that use.
Right.
So,
But it's pretty, I mean, it
and-
looks pretty skinny on this map, the urban
and
service area
in
in
my
that area.
understanding that the Arthur folks are mostly doing residential, so I don't envision this is negatively affecting them.
Okay.
What about the area at Suncoast Parkway and the Hernando County line? That's an interchange, and would we envision anything there?
Well, the only reason I stopped it as the urban service area is because their label is transit corridor. And we are not planning, my understanding is the limits of where we're planning premium transit facilities is up to 52.
Okay.
We're not planning it north of what you see here, the urban service area.
Yeah.
And that portion is in the northeast rural, or,
No, but the 75 up there.
No, it's actually not.
Suncoast.
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 Suncoast, not 75.
I mean, I'm sorry, he said 75. Oh, he was saying Suncoast.
I think it's in the rural market area. It might be, or suburban, I'm not forget which one is.
I think that's rural.
But I'm not sure there's going to be much demand for mini storage north of 52, but even if there was, it's hard for me, in my opinion, to call that a designated transit area.
Yeah.
It's not.
I agree.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if we were just trying to limit it to interchanges and the frontage roads with the interchanges, a la Miller Toledo,
I think would fall in that category versus some of these, and again, I don't know the east side of the county well enough. I mean, are there parcels along Old Pasco Road that back up to 75? Just as another example, I don't know, that's why I was asking the
Well,
question.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know, when we created this map with these two fingers that you see there,
Mhm.
I think the primary goal was to open them up for employment. That was part of the reason they were included in the urban
Sure.
service area. So I don't know, I mean, we could draw the line somewhere else, I'm just not sure where else to draw it.
Right.
I think that's a logical way of doing it, so I'll move that we amend the map to include the urban service areas into the transit corridor.
The Suncoast and I-75.
Yes,
Add them.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
Up to
yes.
52.
Up to
Yes.
52, or the boundary of the urban service area?
I think you go to boundary of the urban service area, because that's delineated.
I think the problem with 52 is if you, especially on the I-75 pieces, there's a big chunk of vacant land north of 52 that you would lose if you stopped it at 52.
Right.
Right.
Sure,
That's
okay.
no problem.
Okay, so you want to take a vote on that
That's
motion first?
That's a motion. Somebody
Yes, I'll
said
second that.
Okay,
I'll second.
Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's an
Then,
aye for me,
Okay,
Mike.
all right, so then the other one that I think you guys had some agreement on was changing the effective date to,
The mobility fee,
so it's building permits issued after
yes, December.
December 27th of,
Okay,
is that, can we get a motion for that change too?
I'll make a motion for that.
and I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
What,
Um,
the other one was 41 north of 52, to include it in the redevelopment corridor.
So that setback would be
And-
what?
That would go to, what, 25 feet?
Yeah. And that's in between, in 52, between the Suncoast and 41, correct? Too, Mike, or no?
Well, what would not be included in the urban service area. So the urban service area goes a little bit to the
yeah, just,
to the
yeah.
east. So it would be 52 to the urban service area. So east of 41, 52 to the urban service area, and then 41 north to the county line to be included in the redevelopment corridor. That's
Is
a
that
motion.
clear? Is that clear?
Yep. Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
okay, those are that's probably the end of the list of the, we had consensus on.
So
right?
then, yeah, so then I guess I'll move for approval of the amended motion, or the amended ordinance.
Do you have anything, Jamie?
I'm sorry, I got one more just clarification thing. End of the ordinance, 1105 E3. I think this is just a typo unless I'm reading it wrong. Is that supposed to say occupies no less than 50%?
Occupies. Yes, thank you.
Shame on me.
Thank you,
So I'll ask Mr.
Commissioner.
Doherty, because I don't want to, we did discuss the issue about the fee reduction for freestanding. I don't know if you want to make a motion on that or not.
Yeah, I'll make a motion, but my motion for approval is to approve the mobility fees with the freestanding boat and RV fee at 0 for all categories until the study's completed and they can come up with a calculated fee.
Motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion on that motion?
So I just want to be clear, though, that that means they'd have to advertise it as an increase if that happens. Because it would start, you'd be reducing it to 0, and then they'll have to advertise an increase of the fee. I mean, they can do, legally they can do it, I just want to make sure you understand the ramifications of
And a
that.
decrease would not require advertisement, is that?
Decrease doesn't, I mean, so if he wants to reduce it now to 0,
Mm-hmm.
that can be done.
Mm-hmm.
But then when the study's done, to get it up to whatever the fee is, you're gonna have to advertise that as an increase, which requires the 90-day thing. I'm not saying it can't be done, I'm just saying.
Unless I misunderstand, my intent of this is to give some incentive to get a fee in that place by the time this is adopted. Let's say they come up with a fee between now and when it goes to the board. Can they put that number in that place for what the board adopts, or does it have to come back to us?
So, okay, so if it happens before this gets adopted, yes, they could just change the 0 to whatever the fee is. If it doesn't happen by the time this gets adopted and the 0 stays in there, then they're gonna have to do a new ordinance with 90 days notice, because now you're increasing the fee from 0 to whatever the fee is. So I'm not sure what you're trying to do.
Well,
right?
let me ask you a question. Is it the intent to have those fees done by the time the board approves it?
Yes, that is the intent. There are calculations that still have to be done and then verified, and that is our hope, to do that by the November 19th.
So if it's not
adoption.
done and the board adopts it, then what happens?
I believe that there's the option that they could place just the freestanding portion, they could place it on hold. Is that the correct term, David? Or pull it out, adopt the increase to the self-storage facility, and place that freestanding component on hold until we get the numbers.
Well, you can't really place an ordinance on hold.
That portion.
You'd have to adopt the ordinance
Mm-hmm.
and then bring back a separate ordinance to lower that fee. I think what Mr. Girardi is suggesting is that the placeholder be 0.
Mm-hmm.
Until the fee is updated.
I guess the question for Mr. Girardi is, what happens if the deed is not done by the time? Are you suggesting it stays 0?
The trip counts are done. Somebody has to determine and approve the trip length and plug the number into the mobility fee formula. Now, that, I'm sure I'm way oversimplifying it, but my concern is somebody at the county needs to push and get this thing through in order to have a number in that place.
So maybe your motion should be that this not be improved until the fee reduction for freestanding self-storage facilities included in the ordinance. The reason you're catching me off guard is with the 0. I don't know what because I think you're agreeing it's not 0. In reality, it's not 0, okay?
I agree.
So why wouldn't your motion just be that the ordinance be amended to include the reduced fee for freestanding RV and boat storage? Then they'll have to figure out how to do that between now and the board meeting.
To extend even past the November 19th,
We can do that. I'll amend my motion.
got them to vote.
Do you understand the motion, staff?
Yes. So to clarify that.
Yeah, can
importantly,
you
does the
repeat that
clerk-
motion?
As I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, the motion is to not approve the ordinance until the updated fee for mobility fees is included for the standalone self-storage facilities for RV and boat storage. What that would mean then is if we get it in time for the November 19, we put it in, and then the ordinance can proceed. If we don't get it by November 19, then we could continue out until we do get it, and then it can be approved.
Don't you still have like another month and a half on the moratorium that you could, in theory, extend it out?
Potentially.
If the board approves it,
Yeah. If the board approves it, right?
you had 6 months and you've only extended it like 2 weeks so far, right?
Just 2 weeks.
So your worst case scenario, well, not the worst case scenario, but if for some reason it wasn't ready by November 19th, you still have another month or so on the moratorium that you could extend that out until this is done, right?
Yeah, and-
I'd like to check that board hearing in December and how that falls. I'm not,
Well, it's 4 months we have 2 months to play with, so you've got about 6 weeks after November.
What I'm hearing Mr. Girardi say is he wants the decrease in there regardless, if that means you got to extend your ordinance however long it takes, so be it. I think that's what he's effectively saying. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think we're saying the same thing. We were just getting about it different ways, that's all.
Okay. So I think if you just make your motion that this not be adopted until the fee reduction for freestanding RV and boat storage is put into the ordinance, the staff will have to figure out how to deal with that.
Is that your motion?
Correct, that's my motion. And I mean, just for clarification, there's everything in that table that has to do with freestanding boat and RV. I mean, again, you don't do it per 1,000 square feet. I don't think that's anybody's intent, but that's what the published tables show. So it's really populating that entire line of freestanding boat and RV.
Yeah, I think they know it all needs to change.
Correct.
The only reason they have some hesitation is I think, because they're unsure they can get it done by November 19th. But what I'm hearing you say in your motion is get it done.
Right, correct.
Okay. And if that means you got to continue the ordinance, you got to continue the ordinance. That's what you're basically saying?
Yes.
Okay.
So should that be an amendment or just part of the motion that approves the ordinance?
I'd probably make it a motion that approves the ordinance, because you can't really,
I don't know how you amend it to.
since we don't know what it's going to be yet, it probably just that you would approve the ordinance subject to them making that change
Right. So-
prior to adoption.
Yeah, so I think the current motion probably should be withdrawn and part of.
Well, I
the
don't know,
motion
I don't know if Mr. Girardi's willing to make the motion that approves the rest of it. Are you?
I'm not.
Okay.
Okay.
So probably one of you needs to make that motion.
I can't.
All right, I'll take that into consideration. The other amendment is this, E3, adding the word no, right?
Right.
So that could be a motion to amend.
You want to just
So-
quickly do that one?
So I'll move that we insert the word no in between occupies and less on 1105.5 E3.
So we have a motion? We have a
I'll second, but just for the record, I think 50% is extremely high. I think there's lots of examples around Tampa, St. Pete, where 50% occupancy of bottom floor storage for ancillary uses has not worked. And you have projects built and you have vacant space everywhere. So, just for the record.
Okay, we do have a second.
Second, yeah, I
Okay.
seconded, yes.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion of the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I guess we have it, Mike.
Minority rules.
I voted for you.
Nobody voted nay, so I guess that's a.
Yeah,
I guess
absence
that
of a
passed.
nay, it's a unanimous vote. So we're back at the main ordinance now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So hopefully I don't mess this up, but I'll move that we approve the amended ordinance subject to the mobility fees being completed before final adoption.
You mean the mobility fees for freestanding RV and boat storage?
That's exactly what I meant. The mobility fee for freestanding RV and boat storage. So Madam Clerk, I'll move that we approve the amended ordinance subject to the mobility fees for freestanding RV and boat storage be determined prior to final adoption.
Well, I think what you probably want to say, well, I'm just, because
Why don't you just make the damn motion? I'll move it, okay?
It's the same as what you said, but I think you mean reduced prior, because technically staff determined them already, which is not what he likes.
Well, determining the final. I guess I'm saying the final.
Or you could say determined in accordance with the pending study. Does that work?
that would be fine.
Okay. You got that motion?
I don't know the wording.
Okay.
Sort of. Okay, do we have a second?
I
on
mean,
that?
again, just to add, I mean, I'm not opposed to the code section as proposed in general. I am proposed in certain sections of the county. I mean, that's why I'm not gonna second it. To make this a blanket development standard across the entire county, I think is way too restrictive on certain sections of the county.
So you think it should
So from
be-
a parliamentary standpoint, if he doesn't second it,
dies for lack of a second?
well, the chair could pass the gavel to the vice chair and second the motion.
Yes, you could.
And David, I'm not involved in this voting wise, right?
Well, he can.
Okay.
If there's a
for the purpose
tie.
of the
If
tie.
there's a tie, yeah.
We can't have a tie today.
Not even wearing one. Yeah, I have the same reservations that Jamie has about the broad stroke of it, and
So let me just throw this out there to you gentlemen, that I think that if I read the tea leaves, I think the BCC is probably going to approve this. And at least with us, it's only recommendationary to them, but at least with us taking position to recommending that they adopt it subject to, I think it's better than us saying that we recommend that you don't adopt it, because I think they're going to do it regardless of what we recommend.
I think you're probably right about
Well,
that.
they kind of did that to you on the moratorium, because you guys.
Well, they did, and I was about ready to say that. They
I
absolutely
agree
did.
with that, but my recommendation would not be to not approve it. I think, I mean, did the other motion fail for a second?
But
Yeah.
so,
Well, it sounds like the
So,
chair is
I
not
mean-
willing to second either, so.
Well, you just,
I mean.
why don't you make a
I-
motion?
I make a motion that we approve the Land Development Code, the 1105, as proposed, with the exception of making it applicable to all self-storage facilities within the three aforementioned corridors. And not countywide. So we're not recommending denial for the thing. I mean, it's not that we're not recommending an approval of the ordinance. I just think it's too broad as proposed.
As I recall, the BCC, when we were speaking to them at the workshop and then later in subsequent board meetings, they did comment on countywide regulation.
Well, I get that. I go back to building facades, paint color, landscape requirements, all that things that I'm sure they probably know all that's in here. I just want to make sure.
But-
And that's why I'm making I made the motion to approve this for only the sections along the corridor, as earlier mentioned in the ordinance.
Just to get clarification, the section is just the 1105.5.b, not the rest of the general standards, which include performance standards, parking, the buffer, multi-use, and clarification of accessory uses, expansion, addition, and the primary use of the freestanding recreational. Not the entire 1105.5, but 11.5.5B.
No, my motion is for 1105.5 to only apply to the corridors.
To E by the corridors, you mean the ones that are referenced above?
Yes, that's correct.
in the map.
But there
The map
will,
corridor.
there will have to be standards for those that, like we have currently, that are outside of the corridor, meaning performance, the accessory uses that are allowed, just basic setback and visual screening, all of that we have currently will also need to apply to the parcels that are not on the corridor.
I
There's also-
understand. I mean, you have those now, you enforce those now under C1, C2. If you don't like them, and if the board doesn't like them, I mean,
Yeah,
I
we
think
have-
new standards need to be come up with. But I think these as proposed are too restrictive.
Okay, so
It's-
I just wanted to clarify that was that entire section and not just the building.
It's really the same conversation that we had regarding the moratorium. I mean, so this body said that we shouldn't apply the moratorium to the whole county. And the county commission said, yeah, we hear you, but we're doing it anyways.
No, actually, they
So-
didn't.
They did.
They
only
didn't?
applied the moratorium to 5456 corridor.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
But at the same
guess-
breath, they said, but we want countywide design standards. They just weren't willing to put a moratorium on the whole county.
Okay,
They're two different analysis, but.
yeah.
But
And I think Jamie's saying, well, you know, in effect, we have countywide design standards because we have
Not,
zoning ordinances.
We are striking those. We are amending it and having it live in the 1105 section. So if you look at the amended sections in the code, the 525C1, which is the only area that has those listed in the special exception piece, those are stricken in order for this new section to happen.
Well, I think what Mr. Gerard is suggesting is that, except for the corridors,
No,
I think his recommendation is that except for the corridors, the listed corridors, the standard's not changed from what's in the existing code. That's effectively what he's saying.
yes, I understand.
There's an important implication, though. If you eliminate the general design standards, A through H, or I, a lot of the incentives that are informing the corridor, section 1105.4A, B, and C, are in these general design guidelines.
To apply.
Yeah,
on the
but he's not
corridor.
suggesting that you not apply A, B, and C.
All this would apply just for the corridors,
He's not saying that you shouldn't apply A, B, and C. He's saying that A, B, and C should only apply in the listed corridors. Isn't that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly right.
The entire 1105.5 should remain to be applicable for the corridors and nowhere else.
I think what he's
What-
really
what I'm
suggesting
sug-
is if you, so let me just try to
Okay, yeah.
simplify this. If the beginning 11.5.5 said the following general design standards are required for all self-storage facilities on the corridors listed above, or on the transit, scenic,
Right,
and
right.
Correct.
that would effectively accomplish what he's saying.
No, yes, I
That's
understand.
what I think he's asking.
Yes.
That's right.
So really what you should do is amend again, do another amendment to the ordinance to add that language.
You can
And
make
then-
you can make an emotion just to add the language we just talked about.
Does that automatically then go back and revert to the other sections of the ordinance that Alexander referred to where they struck all that other language?
It
Well,
would-
they'd have to,
It would
They
have
would strike it,
repercussions,
yeah.
the 907.
yeah, they'd have to eliminate anything they struck through that applies to
Yes,
existing.
because we're trying to condense everything in the one section, not have different standards in different areas of the code. You're flipping through several sections to get the one answer.
And if my memory serves me correctly, the old code was somewhat antiquated to older type developing.
Format and development. There's very few standards for the mini warehouse right now. It's just some visual screening, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's actually what's up on your screen.
Thank you.
Oh.
So they'd have to reinsert those old standards somewhere.
And the landscaping, everything we pulled out, so it's one-stop shop for 1105 is self-storage use. And with the exception of some details, this is all the information you need. And so if not, then you'll say, okay, if I'm not on the corridor, I have to go to section 525 and 900 for something else, and then kind of go back.
So let me
and
ask you this. If, just say Rowan Road, okay? So it just pops into my mind because there's a very old type storage facility that's on that road. So if somebody came in and wanted to do self-storage there, based on what we have right now, which standard would be applied to them?
It's the one here on this screen.
Today.
No,
today?
if this
No,
ordinance
then-
passes, no,
okay.
I mean,
Oh,
let's
I'm
say,
sorry, yeah.
I'm sorry, so if this passes, and this is put into law, which
Just-
standard would you apply to them?
Just the 1105.5 section.
The 1105.5. So what's the setback for that?
The zoning district, which is 25.
Mike, the setbacks and all that go back to the zoning code. It's the buildings and all the requirements for the building, the facade, the paint, all your landscape requirements.
You don't
I
think
just
that's
think there's,
good?
I think there's more in here.
Well, there are landscape requirements
There's
now.
requirements anyways.
Well, I know, but it's a little bit more stringent,
Can you put that,
this type of,
those requirements up again so Mike can see
The-
this?
The self-storage place that was built at Trinity is according to the current
See these
code.
here, Michael?
Is that a bad site?
This is what would apply now. Which your landscape.
no, I mean,
planning,
I agree
buffering.
that the Cubulus and Starkey Boulevard is what you're talking about?
Or even the one at Trinity Corporate Center. I mean,
Yeah.
and those
All
were
right.
both built meeting the code that's in place currently. I mean, but they couldn't be built under what's proposed.
No, they could be, right?
I don't think
mean-
they meet the big box land development. I mean, the big box landscaping requirement. I do not believe they meet that.
No, they don't.
I would have to double check.
So, all right, so these two instances, the one on Trinity Corporate and at Starkey and Decubulus, did they go over and above what our current code requires?
Yes. And oftentimes at pre-apps, we suggest the 1102 be followed in order to improve their appearance.
But they wouldn't have to.
They wouldn't have to right now. That's not how it's been applied, yes.
So did both of those facilities adhere to 1102?
I would have to specifically look to see if, you know, the pre-app notes and if that was taken. It appears that certainly the Starkey Boulevard and the cupolas did in terms of the dimensions, the wall plane change, and how the accessory use is behind the primary building, so it's not up on the front. And so it appears, I would have to confirm.
I mean, what I see on the screen, the current code, I think is just too lax.
The thing to keep in mind too is that the staff did look at what the market is building, and they also did look at what alternative standards were being issued for these types of uses and fused those things into the proposed language here, so that this text would be able to handle without alternative standards in the future, be able to handle a project without having to do alternative standards in the future. Now, there could be an instance in which an alternative standard may still be needed because no text is ever 100% perfect. We have that capability to do that and to use it. But this text has been designed to respond to what the marketplace has already been building in Pasco County and to respond to what alternative standards have already been issued in order to accommodate those developments to take place everywhere in the county.
So the two the two projects that we're discussing here, they've sort of already adhered to what you're proposing. Is that fair?
That would be fair to say, yes.
So then I guess I'll just come back to the commission, then what would be wrong with approving this? If this encourages or requires to be built what we have seen in those two subjected projects, then it seems to me like that we're going in the right direction with this ordinance.
Could I ask a secondary question that's somewhat related, but the standards you have for freestanding RV and boat storage in here, do those exist in the code today, or
No, we had nothing in the code today that specifically talked about freestanding.
so if they don't adopt those, then there's no standards at all for our freestanding?
Correct.
Staff enforces mini storage in those
It would-
cases.
Right now, it's kind of under the umbrella, that was that whole issue in the beginning of the moratorium. It's under the umbrella of the mini warehouse, but it's not specifically
defined anywhere in our LDC and no different standards that would apply to them in any way. So we pulled it out, we
Is
defined
what you
it.
have here more stringent or less stringent than what staff's effectively doing today?
The only piece that we've added that you might say is more stringent is that because the industry identifies 4 types of RV boat storage, that along this transit corridor, we said that those that are the open yards and one that just has the covered shed over it would not be allowed in the transit corridor. So that would be
That I get, but I'm talking about the actual standard for screening and fencing. Is that,
No, we actually allowed for 50% opaque fence instead of 100%.
That's more liberal.
100%.
so I guess that's one danger of not adopting at least that, is that the freestanding RV and boat storage actually may go back to more stringent requirements, is what you're telling me.
Yes.
In that instance, yes. And then their visual appearance in terms of allowing for chain link fence to be viewed from the corridor, like, you know, the major corridors, this.
That's, I think, part of the problem. I mean,
Becomes more
we can talk about mini storage separately, but the historic problem is that RV and boat storage just got lumped, and Mr. Jardy just said it, keeps getting lumped in with mini storage. And so,
Different animal, really.
so staff is forced to apply those standards to freestanding, and they don't always make sense. So that's why staff created separate standards for the freestanding RV and boat
So it
storage.
improves it in the ordinance.
For RV, freestanding
Right.
RV and boat storage, it probably, unless Mr. Jardy disagrees, it probably improves their
In my opinion, what needs to be done here is a separate LO, or 1105.6 needs to be added that covers development standards outside of the transit corridors that are referenced earlier. I mean, I guess I think that there needs to be standards for freestanding boat and RV storage, but I think there's sections along the corridors that should be more tightly regulated than other sections of the county. Personally. I mean,
Well, I'm not sure we're gonna solve this problem.
yeah.
We've been at it a while, and I don't know.
Got a hung jury.
All I'm doing is voicing my opinion. Is there a motion on the floor?
Well, Commissioner Cox did try to make a motion that he never got a second.
Yeah, I've died.
I-
Story of my life. So I have another question.
His motion was to
before we-
approve it as is,
Yeah.
with the subject to them doing the change for the mobility fee for freestanding RV and boat storage.
Right.
I I thought I made a motion to approve it as it was with an amendment to 1105.5, the first section, where it says the following general design standards are required for all self-storage facilities. I believe you need to add, or I'd like to make a motion to add within the aforementioned 3 corridors as shown on the map.
So then we got into a discussion of then what does storage look like outside of those corridors? And
And he was saying you need to add some specific design standards for those,
yeah, because,
separate from what,
well, either
Corridors.
separate or, you know,
Or
so
another
here,
section
my,
of the
my
code.
fear, let me ask this question. If we did that, and there's areas of the county that would fall under the old standards, or lack thereof, could someone go out and build one of these single-story facing the road that has, 30 garage doors facing?
Yes.
See, I don't want to see that. I don't, I think the county's moved past that kind of stuff.
I think the market's moved past that.
I know, so if it has, then adopting this proposed ordinance doesn't hurt the market.
Yes.
But there's things that this includes that are additional requirements to projects you and other people that they've asked have all said they liked.
Well, that's not what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is that the 2 facilities that we like that have recently been built, so the one on the Trinity Corporate Park and Decubulus and Starkey, that those two projects were built to these standards that are in this ordinance.
By and large, they were encouraged in the 1102. But again, unless Denise, you know otherwise, I have to look at the pre-app note specifically because that's not, regularly required, right? So we're saying we suggest it because the size of the building, it would improve your development,
And they voluntarily
and they would
complied, is what I
voluntarily
guess I'm
apply.
saying.
Yes,
Big
correct.
box standards were never brought up for either one
The
of those
nor-
projects.
Oh,
No, Jamie just said my comment.
That's correct. The Starkey project, for example, was approved in 2010.
Yeah.
Granted, it's been non-substantially modified since then, but those standards were never brought up.
So
But-
staff has not historically applied big box to,
No, but
well, let me ask Mr. Girardi, if the solution, would you object to them just applying big box too? If they wiped out the rest of that stuff and just said, well, big box will now apply to mini storage, would that cause you heartburn?
Across the entire county?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't in the transit corridor.
So all I can say is this: if this ordinance would require storage to be built like our two examples, the Trinity Corporate and the Starkey and Decubulus project, if this ordinance would require them to do that, then I think that's the way it should be done across the county. And I'm pretty confident the county commission is going to agree with that.
And I'm completely fine with that. I apologize for hijacking an hour of everybody's time, but I feel strongly that I don't think the big box ordinance applies at certain sections of the county.
Okay.
This just clarifies, right, the 25,000 square foot development that is recognized as a retail commercial use by the mobility fee follows the 1102 standards that we have. Because there's been that confusion, well, it's only self-storage, they don't really sell anything, is it really retail? But in the mobility fee, it's clearly identified as a retail use, commercial, and then their buildings are of 25,000 or greater square feet. On average, they're 90,000 square feet.
So,
Substantial buildings.
so, let me make a suggestion in the interest of time. It doesn't sound like you guys are gonna get a consensus on the bulk of the ordinance. So you could just make a motion to send it, the rest, other than the changes you already recommended, just send it to the board with no recommendation, other than if they adopt it.
Other than the amendments.
Other than if they adopt it, they include the reduction for the freestanding RV and boat storage. I mean, you could do that. There's nothing to say, you could just say, we couldn't agree, so.
We agreed to
We'll send it with
disagree.
we'll send it with no recommendation on the rest of the ordinance, other than adding
Other pieces.
the mobility fee reduction for freestanding RV and boat storage.
And all the amendments that we passed.
And all the prior amendments that you already.
So we passed all these prior amendments and then you just sent it with no recommendation.
Well,
I don't think that makes a lot of sense.
well, or we could just keep making motions to fail. Would you guys, I'm willing to stay here as long as you all want to.
I'm with you.
But is that a motion
Yeah,
required or
you
what?
can make a motion that you send it.
Make a
Wait,
motion.
but before that,
Emotion.
David, I'm sorry, I don't have recorded that we did have a motion to approve subject to the numbers of the mobility fee. I don't have that as a vote yet.
Okay,
Is that
so-
correct?
So, because it died for lack of a second. That was Mr. Commissioner Cox's motion to approve it as is with the reduction included for the freestanding RV and boat storage.
Okay, that was
But,
to,
but he never got a second to that motion.
got it, okay.
Okay. I'm not sure Mr. Girardi ever made a motion, but if he did, I don't know. that
did. It
got
didn't
a
get
se-
seconded.
It didn't get seconded either, so,
Support.
Okay.
so we're kind of stuck.
That's fine, and that's
Um,
where you just,
So my suggestion in the interest of time was
Mm-hmm.
to just have them make a motion to send it to the board with no recommendations other than the ones they previously made.
got it.
And if the board adopts it, that they include the reduction for the freestanding RV and boat storage. That's
Prior to adoption.
prior to adoption.
And the big difference is wanting to apply it countywide or just to the corridors.
To the
I
corridor.
mean, that's the difference.
Yeah.
That's what is the difference of opinion right here.
Sure, and again, I go back to the big box ordinance, and I know, Alexander, you made the statement that it is big box retail. I haven't heard that interpretation, and I don't know who makes that interpretation in the county. But, I mean, maybe that clarifies the issue, but I've done numerous 100,000 square foot self-storage projects that have not been applied, and then in the big box, the big box requirements have never come up for storage.
And, yeah. And
Because
so
the argument is
been-
it's not a retail, it's not a Walmart. Is that what the argument is?
Yeah.
Yes, historically, we've looked at the actual trip generation of it as being significantly different from something like a Walmart or a Sam's Club, where you have a large number of people coming in during the course of the day, in and out, in and out, in and out. It's very intense use. So we did not interpret that the same way. So historically, we did not apply 1102. That was the direction that we were given.
The problem with big
Makes
box
sense.
is it's kind of a blunt instrument. It deals with more than just how the building looks. It deals with like safe storage for pedestrians and things like that. So
For access,
it
number of
doesn't
parking
lend
spaces.
itself well to a mini storage use. I think that's why staff tried to pull out
Yes.
the relevant
just the
parts of it and
applicable.
put it
Correct.
in this
Applying only to storage.
order. Right.
And
mean, that makes
really
sense to
the
me.
building itself, not all the other components of 1102.
Yeah, that makes sense to me that you're doing it that way. And making it uniform across the county makes sense to me. I mean, but also I don't apply these things either. So, I mean, that's probably
Right.
where it's not making sense to you. I don't know.
And Brad explained the historical interpretation that has been the case, but we've also identified that the mini warehouse sector is organized under the retail category of the mobility fee ordinance. So there's been a discrepancy in the past, and I think what we've been leaning toward now is what's written here in the proposed ordinance, which is that you should consider the mini warehouse similarly in design to the retail activities, because it is a dormant use and it can take up significant frontages of our commercial areas, which tend to be flagship areas in terms of the identification of Pasco County. So our C2 land uses and our C1 land uses and those types of commercial districts are very important to the image of the county. When a mini warehouse facility plops itself into one of those districts, what you're introducing is a dormant use that provides no jobs, no economic benefits, and quite possibly a street level, I don't want to use a strong term, but street level killing capability. So in that sense then, with the direction of this proposal, we've been thinking about that and looking to consider it as part of the retail building stock that exists within a community, consistent with the mobility fee ordinance.
So I can't make motions, but that was my recommendation that you do.
I'll make the motion that David just stated.
So to repeat, it's that other than the recommendations previously made, that the bulk of the remainder of the ordinance go to the board with no recommendation from the planning commission, other than if the board adopts it, include the reduction for freestanding RV and boat storage that's the subject of the pending study. And do you want to include in the motion that the reason you could not reach consensus is because of the geographic applicability of the ordinance?
Yes, I think that's important.
You okay with that?
Yes.
I think that was a second.
Yes, I'll reluctantly second it.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Again, Terry and Alexander, I know you guys have put a lot of work in here, and there's a lot of good stuff. Don't misunderstand my
Not at all.
lack
No,
of support. It's the big box outside of the corridors that I'm
It's
hung
great
up
to
on.
have
So,
discussions. I mean, it's good.
very good.
Well, in many ways, this discussion was far better than the one the board had, so. Don't tell them I said that.
I hope the recording was off. A couple of them watch us.
I moved that we adjourned 2 minutes ago.
Yeah. Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. All right.
Please don't adjourn. Got something
We
more.
did.
some more
Oh,
stuff
that's
for
right.
you.
We got one more thing to go.
Unadjourned.
We're unadjourned.
Back in session, are we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So as you all know, thank you for that lively conversation. It is, October is a National Community Planning Month, and I just wanted to present a resolution that the Board of County Commissioners passed and read it for the record and present it to the Planning Commission. So I'll go ahead and read that. By the Board of County Commissioners, Resolution number 20-008, a resolution by the Board of County Commissioners of Pasco County, Florida, recognizing the month of October as Community Planning Month in Pasco. Whereas change is constant and affects all cities, towns, suburbs, counties, boroughs, townships, rural areas, and other places, and whereas community planning and plans can help manage this change in a way that provides better choices for how people work, live, and play, the goal of planning is to maximize the health, safety, and economic well-being for all residents. And whereas community planning provides an opportunity for all residents to be meaningfully involved in making choices that determine the future of their community, and whereas the full benefits of planning requires public officials and citizens who understand, support, and demand excellence in planning and plan implementation, and whereas the month of October is designated as National Community Planning Month throughout the United States of America and its territories, and whereas the American Planning Association and its professional institute, the American Institute of Certified Planners, endorse National Community Planning Month as an opportunity to highlight the contributions sound planning and plan implementation make to the quality of our communities and environment, and whereas the celebration of National Community Planning Month gives us the opportunity to publicly recognize the participation and dedication of the members of the Planning Commission and other citizen planners who have contributed their time and expertise to the improvement of Pasco County, and whereas we recognize the many valuable contributions made by professional community and regional planners of Pasco County and extend our heartfelt thanks for the continued commitment to public service by these professionals. Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of County Commissioners of Pasco County, Florida, that said board hereby recognizes the month of October as Community Planning Month in Pasco County, done and resolved in regular session with a quorum present and voting this 22nd day of October 2019. So as the Planning Commission, you all play a very important role in the Pasco County planning process as our expert body. For that, you all deserve this recognition, and our thanks as PDD for all the work you do to facilitate the development of Pasco County in an orderly and well-planned and representative manner. So I have copies here of that resolution for each of the members of the Planning Commission. So thank you. I think our resident photographer is here also to take pictures with the resolution and the Planning Commission.
Does that resolution come with a check?
It comes with a seal.
Oh, wonderful.
I can pass out the resolution and then
All
we
right,
can.
Jerry, come on up. Let's get a picture.
We have to come down.
Yeah, you can
Come down, okay.
We earned
Stan signed you up for that, right?
I know.
I didn't think anything, I was gonna keep going back and forth.
Yeah, I know. That's the first time that ever happened. Really?
Well, we didn't have the full group today either,
There's
so.
a one right up here.
Yeah, maybe it was.
What kind of scribbles? Starkey didn't sign it. How rude. She was sick, oh, okay. Okay. I'll get her to sign it
And I have to
tonight.
also make
Good
sure
job.
it's, thanks.
Come on up, guys.
Okay,
Can all have
thank you.
Well, I gotta talk to
He
them
needs
about
our-
IT security and awareness training.
Come on in the middle.
Okay.
No.
No, sorry,
You can't leave.
I fibbed. I said 2:30.
Let's get up here. Come on, get up.
I can't imagine we need protection for this.
I thought I was gonna do bunny ears.
You're gonna be in the that's the best part, that's why you don't want to go on the front.
Well, you just go right behind there.
Be over by David.
Come on in.
Mike and I were always
Come
in
here,
front,
man.
right, Mike?
Yeah, oh yeah. I know where I stand.
We work We brought the camera. All right.
All right, so now
Does that have film in it?
Done now?
No, one more thing. All right, so,
That was gonna be easy.
all right, one last thing.
Uh-oh.
So on your county, at pascocountyfl.net emails, you should have received not you, Richard, sorry. You should have received an email talking about a security awareness training that you would have to take. It's called the Annual Security Awareness Training. It's like a 15-minute video, if you would please watch that when you get an opportunity. Our IT folks are telling us to do that because it explains to you what phishing attacks are, what spam is, and different links that you shouldn't click on your county at pascocountyfl.net email, and of course in your regular lives as well. So I just wanted to let you know that that's something that IT has told us that we've got to do.
I'll also warn you that sometimes IT intentionally sends out, like, gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah, our company does it all the time. Our company does that.
Yes, it does.
That they're intended to see whether you're listening to them.
It's actually really interesting because the last email advising us that you have to take this class, it says, this email is not a phishing attack. You can call me directly. So this is the Chief Information Officer in IT. Yeah. So thank you, that's what I've had.
So I need help getting back onto the system.
Yes.
I've never gotten a notice. If we're supposed to have gotten them, I've never gotten one.
Subject to the same deadline that
You missed the email. you
So
had to change
actually,
it.
the deadline,
Yeah.
thank you
I
so
deleted
much
it.
for mentioning that to me.
So you can't
The
do
deadline is actually tomorrow. However, I have asked that it specifically be extended for you because I was going to announce it at today's planning commission. So if you can do it as quickly as possible, I would really appreciate it. But the deadline will be extended, but it's tomorrow is the deadline.
Just watching a video?
It's just watching a video,
It
yeah.
really takes literally 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not.
Supposedly it's a 15-minute video, but it didn't seem like it was that long.
Where's it gonna be coming from? Because I haven't gotten it.
You haven't gotten it?
IT service desk, right?
Yes. Yeah, I can forward it to you.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, does it? Okay.
Denise,
All
can you
right.
just quickly give them an update on where we stand with the missing vacancy?
Sure, thank you. So, yes, thank you so much. So, Friday was the deadline for application for planning commission, for the planning commission, and I have compiled a list, sent the list out to the Board of County Commissioners yesterday. Of course, they have to respond to me individually, not all together. And I've asked them to provide 3 names, and then by November 8th, I think I gave them as a deadline. And based on that, that'll be brought forward to the board.
So we're looking to have a replacement sometime in December?
Probably December, because I think they only meet, well, they meet twice in November, but I don't think it'll, let's say December.
And how many applicants were there?
There were 14 applicants.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we adjourn now?
Yes, sorry, thank you.
So moved.
Again. Okay, I think I already had 2 motions,
You
so.
did.
We're adjourned.
Wasn't for me, you'd still be here fighting about mini stores.
Well,
You're
thank
right.
God. Thank God for you, David.
I'm taking you to dinner.